Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Autodesk booth. My name is Darryl Bear, and as my good friend Bill just said, we're going to be talking about Maya and motion graphics. So Maya 2016 Extension 2 is available today. It's shipping. If you guys are on subscription, you'll be able to download it and get it and start to play around with these tools immediately, which is really, really cool. And we're going to be talking about motion graphics and a whole lot more. The reason we say a whole lot more is because we have a new motion graphics tool set that sits on top of the foundation of Maya. So it brings all the great things that Maya is famous for. Its amazing openness, its scalability, its speed, its performance in the viewport, and all the really cool effects that it can do with things like Bifrost for liquid simulations or our cloth solvers or the amazing modeling tools that we've been working on so hard over the last several releases. So that's really why we're saying motion graphics and a whole lot more, because this is motion graphics being done with Maya, which makes it really special. So we're going to be looking at a few things today, and we really want to, our story started several releases ago. We've been driving very hard to make Maya more accessible to the generalist. If you look at our track record over the last several releases, we've been trying to take tools that were extremely sophisticated and make them very, very easy to use, and we'll be seeing examples of that today around motion graphics with the new motion graphics toolkit. So we started this work pretty heavy a few releases ago, and one of the major components of this was the overhaul of the user interface. We took Maya and we gave it a new coat of paint. The user interface now scales elegantly to high DPI monitors, and at the same time of doing that, we introduced a new look development environment, a new hypershade window, so it makes creating shaders very, very fast, very easy, all the types of things you want right where you want them. And we also took the time to reorganize the menu structures. Maya, over the last 10 years, had stuff kind of thrown all over the place, so this was our time to draw a line in the sand and say, you know what, we're going to move stuff around. Yes, our old users might be a little bit upset, but it's the right thing to do, because once we do that, it will be a more efficient workflow, and it's going to make it easier for new people to get into the tool and be efficient. So that's why we took the time to do that in 2016. 2016 extension came around, and we introduced the new type tool. This is a really, really nice 3D type tool. It's very open. It has the ability to be driven procedurally, and we'll be looking at an example of that today. We also, at the same time of extension 1, introduced the Adobe import of SVGs, so you can copy and paste back and forth between Adobe Illustrator and Maya to bring in your Illustrator files through the SVG importer. So we'll be checking that out in just a second. So that's pretty much it. We're going to hop into Maya 2016 Extension 2 now. And before we get there, I want to just play back something to kind of show you the effects that we're going to be working on and building up to. So we'll just kind of escape out of this guy, and we'll kind of minimize this down, and I'll just play this back in RV, Shotgun RV, which is an awesome, awesome player. So these are the assets that we're going to be playing around with inside of Maya today. This is a really quick broadcast job, a really quick kind of graphic design job that I threw together using these new motion graphics tools that Maya has. So it's lots of that kind of classic motion design effects here. Here's a really good example of us using Bifrost with the motion graphics tool set to do the audio EQ. Notice the viscosity in here. I've cranked that up a little bit so it feels a little bit more like paint, not exactly like liquid or fluid. It gives it that kind of nice look of that. And then this is doing that kind of classic Plex effect. So we're going to be building up several of these effects inside of Maya using the new motion graphics tool set. And we'll hop into that and do that right now. So let's just close this guy down, and we'll jump into Maya to start our presentation. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to go ahead and get that logo work done, that Made in Maya logo done. And as I said before, this work started off as a 2D vector file inside of Adobe Illustrator. So let's just jump over to Illustrator really quickly, and we'll grab this guy. So we'll just grab it, and we'll say Edit, Copy. And what I'll do now is hop back into Maya, go up to my Create menu, and make a new SVG import node. With that done, all we have to do is go to the SVG shape and go ahead and click the Paste button. So we were able to copy and paste right out of Illustrator into Maya. Very fast, very easy, the types of things that you'd want to do. It's a little large, so I'm going to scale that guy down. So the next thing I want to do is jump back into Illustrator and get that in. So we're going to, let's grab it as a group here. So we're going to grab that whole object. We're going to take that guy, and we're going to copy it. So we'll say Edit, Copy one more time. Jump over to Maya and make another SVG node, and we'll just paste that guy in, and we can scale that down to a value of 10 also. So now I've got my two elements in Maya that I can begin building my logo with. So we're just going to kind of spin this guy around a little bit. I'm holding down a J key, which snaps to 45, so kind of snap that guy back to where I want it. That looks pretty good, and then we'll just scale this guy up. And what I want to do is I want to have these objects intersect each other to kind of make a Boolean operation. I'm going to grab the areas where they're only in the intersection. So we'll kind of scale this M up and move it forward like that. So with that done, we can just grab both of these objects, jump over to my modeling menu, which I'm already in, go to Mesh, Boolean, and inside of the Boolean operation, do a simple intersection. So that's the beginning of our logo. Very fast and easy to do using that copy-paste workflow. So here's where it gets kind of cool. What happens if I make a change to that Illustrator file? Well, guess what? because we're doing this with a history turned on, it's going to update and have those changes propagate through that Boolean operation automatically. So let's check that out. We'll jump back into Illustrator. I'm going to grab something like this guy and just kind of pull that down a little bit, maybe somewhere around there. Just do something a little different with it. So it's a slightly different shape. It's actually a little off-center. It's fine. It doesn't really matter. We'll copy that by Control-C. We'll jump back in here, and this was done on the first SVG import that we did, so we'll just switch over to that node, and we'll go ahead and we'll hit paste, and you can see now it's gone ahead and updated that shape, and just all that work that I did after that import basically just got redone for me automatically, and that's really a very nice, elegant workflow. So the next thing that we want to do is use that text tool that we talked about briefly to start to add in that made word. So how do you do that? Very straightforward. Go up to the Create menu, go to Type. With that guy kind of made, we can just give it a word. Other than 3D type, we'll just say made. And I'm going to just scale this guy down really quickly. And we'll kind of position it sort of over here. Looks like I probably have to scale it down a little bit more, but it'll take a second to do that. We'll spin it around, again holding that J key down to snap to my 45s. And yeah, I do need to scale that down a fair bit more, but just kind of position it there, scooch it over, kind of scale that guy down, and now it looks pretty cool. So if we want to begin animating this, well, how do you do that? Well, we could obviously set keyframes on this in a traditional way, but because we've done this using the text tool or the type tool, we can use the animation section that's built into it. The nice thing about using the section that's built into the type tool is any changes I make to that type now, that animation will seamlessly transfer onto it. So if I change the words, the characters, the font, I don't have to reanimate it. It has a really nice procedural nature to it. So how do we animate this? Well, it's very straightforward. I know I want to have this land right here around frame 30. Let's just turn on animate. Let's figure out which axis. So that's the axis that we're going to want to animate this guy kind of coming in here. So we'll just say set a key there. We'll move back to frame 0. We'll push this guy out somewhere like that. We'll just say set key on it. So now if I start to play this back or scrub through my time slider, you can see here comes my word made, and what happens is there's a delay on there. That frame delay is just built in, which is really quite nice. And this is like I said before, I've animated it, it's got frame delay on there. If I go back in there and I just put an exclamation point on this, and it looks like it's a little big, so we can just kind of scale that guy down, you can see that that animation still just works even though I've made a change to the underlying font or the underlying word, in this case the underlying characters. So that's really what a procedural workflow is all about. And all these motion design tools that we're going to be looking at today in Extension 2 are procedural in nature, and that's really the key takeaway here. They're fast, they're fun, they're easy to iterate with. So let's do something a little bit more complicated. Let's start making one of, kind of a traditional motion graphics look. So how do you do that? Well, the first thing you need to do is get a piece of geometry to begin working with. We can kind of blow that away, and we don't really need this guy anymore. We can blow that away. We'll get another version of these guys kind of turned on. And what we're going to do is create a polygon object that we want to start instancing and moving around. So we'll just grab this guy, and we'll go ahead and we'll unhide that cube, and we're going to create a new motion design network out of it. So with that done, basically what we've done here is we've instanced this guy 10 times along the x-axis. These are the Motion Graphics Toolkit's procedural nodes. Each one of these is a gem. You dive into there, there's tons of options, and you layer these guys together to come up with these more complex effects. Keep in mind that these nodes can also be used with the standard Maya tools. These are just actual nodes in the Maya dependency graph, so you can use the node editor to reorder these if you want to. We're going to be using a very kind of generalist workflow of pointing, clicking, dropping them on top of each other using this user interface to build our networks. But if you wanted to build the networks in the node editor, obviously you have that flexibility as a Maya artist. So what we're going to do is check out the distribution node first. So right now we're distributing these points. We have 10 points going down that x-axis in a linear fashion. I can start to increase that, maybe switch the distribution model to something like radial, maybe give it some z-distance. So very fast, very easy, always non-destructive in nature because they're procedural. Now, I don't really need an array or a radial grid. I want a radial distribution. I want to get a grid of points to make a nice big array. I want to have a lot of these guys in my scene to begin playing around with. So we will go back to the grid settings. We'll increase the size of those guys, and I'm just going to give it a ton of points. Actually, I'm going to give it 50 points and on each one of these guys. So what that means is we've obviously got 2,500 instance cubes in our scene, and we'll just kind of pull that guy out like that. And we'll pull this guy out like this. Oops, I've got 5,500, so that's like 25,000. I didn't want that many. I wanted 50, not 5,500. That's an insane amount of points. Still fast, though. That's kind of cool. All right, so we've got our nice array. So awesome. Notice what's going on in here. super fast, right? Maya is going to be real time. This is Viewport 2.0, and the great thing about Viewport 2.0 is its massive ability to scale. You can have millions of polygons inside of Viewport 2.0, and it's still blazingly fast. It's also very high quality, amazing, amazing shading quality inside of the viewport directly in Maya. So we've got all the bells and whistles turned on in here. I've got things like depth of field on, so you can see that the Made in Maya logo in the background's in focus, the cubes in the foreground obviously out of focus. We've got 16 samples on the screen anti-aliasing going on. We've got screen-based ambient occlusion happening, giving it these nice soft kind of contact points on all the shadows. We've got volume lights, and we've got some area lights inside of here with some soft shadows turned on. So it's also got the ability to do motion blur inside of the viewport. So it's really, really high quality. It's a great environment to work in. So with that said, let's go ahead and start looking at some of these other procedural building nodes. And the first one that we're going to check out is the influence. So what's the influence do? Well, it basically gives you a locator in your scene that influences the objects underneath it. So if we start to scale this guy up, something like that. Oops, let's go to the other axis there. We'll scale this guy up, and then we'll kind of pull it up here on the y-axis. What it's doing is it's translating, or it's influencing the underlying instance cubes with its transformation. So its move, scale, rotate, all contribute to what's happening with the cubes that are within its region of influence. And you can obviously adjust its region of influence by going back onto that influence node. So if we wanted it to spread out a little bit more, I could obviously do that very easily. So we're going to kind of scale this down here, and we'll just move this through. And this really gives you an understanding of what Maya and motion graphics is all about, and why we say it's a whole lot more. The performance that I have inside of here is really pretty amazing, right? I'm influencing 2,500 objects in real time with all those really cool viewport effects turned on. Super, super cool. So what we're going to do for this example is I don't really want to have that object, and obviously rotation would also influence those, right? Like you can start to spin that around or whatever you want to do. For this next example, what we're going to do is we're going to start to combine some texturing information into this. Very common workflow when you're doing motion design work is to have texturing information helping you with your project, and we're going to look at that now. So we're going to go ahead and turn down the effect of this influence object a little bit. So we'll go back onto its node. I'm going to turn off use random. By turning off use radius, by turning off the use radius, what happens is we're now influencing these guys all exactly the same, pretty much, and we'll kind of scale that guy down. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to start to texture this. So if we look at this guy, we have a strength, right? So I could use the strength to adjust it. I could use random strength to randomly drop those guys off, or we could use step strength to start to kind of scale through those guys. Really what we want to do in this example is we want to go ahead and we want to have those guys disappear. So we're going to go back to our procedural building blocks here, the motion design nodes, and we're going to use visibility. We're going to drop a visibility node on top of what we just did with that influence node. So we'll just layer that guy on top. And now what we can do is we can go ahead and start to randomly adjust the visibility or step through the visibility. Or in this example, you can see that we have the ability to texture map it. And right now it's doing a map projection down the y-axis. So what we're going to do, we're going to click the little map icon next to strength map, and we're going to pipe into this a texture node. It could be a file texture like a bitmap image, or in this example, we're going to be using a procedural texture, one of the procedural shading network nodes inside of Maya. These could be either 2D or 3D. So if you had a grid that went up in Y also, and you threw a solid noise on there, you'd have the ability to have these visual cubes being carved out of that 3D solid or that 3D fractal. Very, very cool. Now, as I said before, because this is a procedural node, if I make changes to this, obviously it's going to update the procedural, the other nodes that are layered on top of it. So that motion design network just updates. Now, I could do something like this inside of Maya previously. Yes, I mean, they do crazy stuff with it. You see people presenting here showing Star Wars and how they're doing things like that. But it wouldn't be real time. It wouldn't be fast to iterate, and it wouldn't be friendly for designers. And that's really what these tools are made for, is for designers to work efficiently, to iterate with, to play, and have fun with. And that's what we're trying to communicate today. So with that done, let's start doing something a bit more complicated. We had another effect that we saw on there where I had some cubes that were kind of waving around, kind of looking really trippy, and then they conformed into the Made in Maya logo. So how do you do something like that? Well, it's really kind of similar workflows. We're going to start off with an object, we're going to instance it, and we're going to start using these procedural building blocks to modify its position and put some animation on it that's very art directable, very fun, and very friendly to play with. So let's go ahead and get this guy inside of here. We'll unhide that guy, and we're going to walk through the same process that we just did previously. We're going to take this cube, and we're going to go to create a new motion design network out of that cube. With that done, we can now start to change the distribution type. So we did some other stuff before, the kind of radial, we did the grid. We actually have one called mesh. So the way the mesh works is you just drag and drop an object in that you want to have controlled position in this example. So right now what we're doing is we're randomly scattering those guys around. You can see the method is scatter. So every face just kind of gets some cubes thrown around on top of it. Pretty straightforward. Let's look at some of the other methods that we can switch this to. So edge, well, what edge does, it's really kind of cool. It's going to put on each one of these guys, if we hit flood mesh, each edge now gets an instance cube on it. And that instance cube actually can be multiplied times the length of the edge if you turn on enable scaling. So this allows us to make geometry outline other geometry's edges. So we're procedurally building up sort of an edge finding piece of modeling, essentially, with this, which is really, really kind of cool. So if we go in here and we take this cube and we unhide it just so we can see what's going on there, and I scale that guy up, you can see how fast I was able to how fast I was able to make something that's going to go ahead and just find the edges of this object. And obviously, it's still procedural, right? I could change what object I'm doing the edges with by redragging another object in there, or I could change the underlying mesh. I could change the topology of the underlying mesh because flood's turned on. It would automatically make a new line on each edge. And keep in mind that everything that we've done obviously can still be animated on and off, right? So we still have the ability to do really cool building effects of edges coming on and building things and stuff like that. Super simple to do that with the Motion Design Toolkit inside of Extension 2 of Maya 2016. So we didn't really want to do an edge thing. We were trying to do that voxelized, trippy thing. So we'll go ahead and we'll turn voxels on. We'll kind of scale this up. And if we hide this object here, you can see that we've voxelized that space, but it's kind of a coarse voxelization. You're not really picking up on the fact that that says made in Maya. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just jump over to a preset for the voxel space, and it's dropped the voxel density, or the voxel scale down a little bit. That's all we've really done is change that voxel scale. So we'll just kind of rerun that preset there. I'll grab this cube and I'll just scale that guy down. So I actually like it where the cubes touch each other vertically. It kind of gives us this really nice, strong graphical element with those lines kind of coming down. So that's the beginning of this. So the next thing we want to do is begin animating it. How do we do that? We go back into our procedural building blocks and we start layering them on top of the work that we've already done. Very straightforward. So let's check this out. We'll go in here and we'll add onto this guy something like the noise to position. So if we rewind our playback head, I'm going to crank this up to like 3,000. Nice big frame range there. And as we play this back, obviously, we could go ahead and start to dial in how we want it to look. How much noise do I want? How fast do I want the noise going? Do I want it to stop it at some point and animate down and form the logo? Well, I could do that just by animating strength, or animating random strength to drop it down, or animating the step strength. So you'll notice that you see these kind of same things. Strength, random strength, step strength. All those procedural building blocks have that notion, and the ability to be texture mapped. You see that information here also. Where it really starts to get interesting is when we start to use fall-off objects. What fall-off objects do is they give us an interface to interact with these objects, and it gives me this volume. So if it's within the volume, that center volume, that controls the effect 100%. If it's in the outer volume, it's going to 0. And then there's a ramp widget that's just essentially a multiplier or a modifier of what's happening with that object as it transitions. So if we jump into the fall-off object and double-click on this guy, you can see I've got this ramp modifier that's transitioning, not quite in a linear fashion from the inside edge to the outside edge. So I'm going to scale this up. And you can see as I move this object around now, it interacts with that procedural network. Very, very straightforward. Now, we wanted this effect to build, not explode when the object hit it. So how do you do that? Very straightforward. We just invert the fall off. So by clicking the invert button, we now have a simple effect that as this plays back and I start to wipe my fall off object into that region there, it basically starts to fall off. So that's kind of cool. I like that. But the effect that we saw before, the original effect, was more like a wavy, trippy effect. So just random noise moving those cubes around isn't going to give me that effect. I actually got there using the trig node. So how do we add another node in here? It's just very simple. You go back to the procedural network. You have your list of nodes that you want to start layering on top of each other, and we add a new deformer or a new trig node to the position. So this is going to translate the position based on that trig node. So if we just drop the preset over here to wave, and we jump back to our noise node, it's going to be really strong still. I don't want that noise that strong, so I'm going to drop that down almost to 0, and we'll play this back one more time. So what we've got now is we've got that kind of wavy effect happening. There's a little bit of noise on there. I could turn the noise off completely, or I could start to dial it in. And this is really what working with the tools is all about. Experimenting, playing, iterating, all happening in real time. So what happens is we want to have that trig effect also get turned off by a fall-off object. And the cool thing about this is we can use the same fall-off object in several places. So we've got this fall-off object driving the noise. We're also going to use that same fall-off object to also turn, oops, let's kind of scroll down here, my bad. Let's undo that. We're going to use that same fall-off object to affect the trig node. So let's just drag and drop that guy in there. So now what do we have? Well, we've got something that's kind of moving around. It's doing its trippy thing. We start to transition this guy into it, and it starts to turn it off. Now, it's a pretty abrupt effect when it turns off. So I'm going to layer one more node on top of this, and this time what we're going to layer on top of it's going to be the jiggle node. So if we put the jiggle inside of there, it's a spring is actually what we call it, but essentially it gives us the ability to have a little jiggle effect happen on this guy. So as we play our interactive playback and I move this object in there, you can see that it has that little lag, that little jiggle. And I could sit here and play around with this and dial this in by adjusting the dampening, the stiffening, and the spring strength. Lots of user control, lots of flexibility. And again, this isn't simulation, right? But it looks kind of like a particle system. It's just art directable with sliders. Very, very cool, super fun to work with, and very fast to iterate on. So the last effect that we want to look at quickly for the next 7 minutes is building up sort of that Plex effect that we saw earlier. So let's check that out. This is actually really cool. So we'll kind of blow this away. We can blow away this other guy. We don't need him in here anymore. And we're going to get this dude turned back on by just hitting my H key. So what I've got here is I've got that same Made in Maya logo that we looked at previously, except I took each face and I separated it out, and I did a little extrusion and gave it a little offset. So we want to have this become our new motion design network. This is going to be the object that's moving around and we're going to be playing around with. So if we'll just undo that translation on this guy, we'll grab all, I don't know how many, I think it's 68 or something like that. Yeah, there's 68 faces in that letter that have been extruded. So we're going to grab all those, create a new motion design network out of it. With that done, what it's done is it grabbed that first object that it found and it instanced it out 68 times. You'll see the distribution node has been automatically set to 68. That's cool, but that's not really what we want. We wanted each one of those guys to be unique. We wanted to have each face actually be part of our motion design network. So how do you do that? Straightforward. Just add an ID node in there. So now it's going to go through and make each one of those guys be one of those faces becomes a new ID or a new point that can be moved around by the procedural network. And what we're going to do is we're going to just go ahead and change its distribution type. So right now they're just going down the x-axis, right? Really what we want to do is just have them be the initial state. So we've now got the Made in Maya logo hooked up into our motion design network, and nothing's moving it. So how do we make stuff move? We go back to that original building block, back to our main user interface to get those building blocks and start layering them on top of each other. So for this example, we'll just add a noise on there to position. We can go ahead and we can increase the amount that noise has, pretty straightforward, something like that. So these guys are kind of hanging out there, but they're really, really big, right? If we play this back, that wasn't the look that I had. They were kind of small little Made in Maya logos, and then they formed into the bigger Made in Maya logo. So how do you do that? Well, you're going to add an offset in there. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's add another node to this that's going to do an offset. So we're going to take this and add this to scale. By adding that to scale, we just added a value of 1 to it. So it's offset. It took everything in its current place and just went 1, 1, 1 in X, Y, and Z. That's not what we want to do. We want to make these guys get smaller. Easiest way to do that is just to switch it to multiply and multiply it times 0. So now we've zeroed it out, right? The strength slider is going to adjust how much that effect is happening. Pretty straightforward. Now, I'm not going to use the strength slider to animate that. Really what I want to do is I want to get a fall-off object in there. These fall-off objects really are one of the workhorses of the motion design networks. So we're going to add a fall-off object in here that's going to give me a user interface element to adjust that scale. Pretty straightforward. So now if I start to move my object inside of here, they're getting smaller. So we're going to do that same trick that we did before where we invert the fall-off. So we'll double-click on this guy. We'll invert the fall-off. So now if the network's not in it, they're basically zeroed out. You don't even see them. And when the fall-off object gets over top of them, they start to go back to their original size of 1. Now, we don't want them to go down to 0. So we're going to take that range and just lift that ramp a little bit and kind of set their minimum value that they're going to have. Now, check this out. This is all happening with that depth of field turned on, all those shadows, all the really cool Viewport 2.0 stuff happening. And this is going to build that logo up in real time. So the last thing that we want to do is get the effect of that noise not being influenced, having that same fall-off object drive the noise. So if we do something like that, we go back to our interactive playback, and we move our object inside of here. You can see, if we just kind of scale this guy up a little bit, you can see that now we have the ability to have that logo kind of come up, and it's moving around, it's doing its thing. You move your object inside of there, and it basically starts to turn off. So the last thing that we want to do is add on one of my favorite nodes in the Motion Design Network toolset, and that is the Trails node. And this one's so fun. It's very, very flexible. There's lots of options for this one. So if we play this back, we'll kind of zoom in here. Oops, let's not do that. We don't want to pick all that stuff. And we play this back. What happens is it's just got some trails on it. Let's go ahead and we'll rewind that guy to frame 1. So you can see that as these guys move around, they're leaving little geometry-based trails. We can adjust how long those trails are. We can have decay on those trails. For this example, I did something that, in the original movie that wasn't trails. What I did was I used the option of, I think I used join the dots. I don't remember which one I used actually. So if we go to trails here, I'll just flip through a few of these options and try to find the one that we use. So we had, was it join the dots? It might have been join the dots. If we crank the count up on that, no, I don't think it was join the dots. It must have been connect to a point. Connect to a point one's actually really cool. If we increase the scale on that guy and then just push that point over, you can obviously drag and drop a node into that to drive that point, but that looks really fun to me. I think the one that I did end up using was connect the nearest, and then I cranked the count on the connect the nearest up a little bit, something like that. And that was what we had. So now if we play this back one last time, we'll kind of do something like that. And you can see just like that, that kind of goes and builds that logo. So with that done, we're going to jump back into our PowerPoint slide, and I just want to do a couple of housekeeping things. It looks like we closed the PowerPoint slide down, so we'll re-queue that guy back up, and we'll just plow through it very, very quickly. So let's just do a show on that guy, and we'll play this back here. So get audio on that. This was done actually using the Motion Design Toolkit. This is one of the presets. We're going to be talking about presets in just a bit. Maya 2016 Extension 2, as we said before, is available today. It's motion graphics and a whole lot more, which I hope you guys got the gist of that. It's based on Maya. That makes it super special. We saw the fact that we had the new user interface that we started back in 2016, the 3D type tool that we did an extension with that copy-paste workflow from Adobe Illustrator, and then we jumped into the demo, which we saw here. And here's what I was trying to get to in my deck. Autodesk has acquired Solid Angle. This is very exciting. This is very exciting news for us. It's business as normal as far as Solid Angle is concerned. Just like the Shotgun acquisition, Solid Angle works with many different applications. It works with Houdini. It works with C4D. We will continue to support those products just like we did with Shotgun. It's also worth mentioning that Maya is currently shipping with Mental Ray. That does not change. The announced release date here we have Extension 2 is shipping with Mental Ray. We're looking at how we're going to integrate Solid Angle and Arnold into Maya in the future. Those decisions haven't been finalized yet. It's also worth mentioning that we are still very much a render agnostic company. Everything that we showed you with the Motion Design Toolkit is render agnostic. It will work with RenderMan. It'll work with Maya and Mental Ray. It'll work with Arnold. It'll work with V-Ray. Moving forward, we will always continue to support our friends at those companies. Redshift also. All these rendering engines are very viable options. All of our clients are using them, and we would never want to have those relationships in any way. So the acquisition of Solid Angle does not change that or impact that in any way moving forward, and that slide kind of speaks to that. So the last thing I want to say and talk to you about briefly is the fact that we have also announced a partnership with Google's Inc., the Google Cloud Platform. This allows you to immediately scale up to 30,000 nodes on the Google Cloud Platform inside of Maya 2016 Extension 2. Super cool technology. Come over to the pod and check it out. We can walk you through a presentation of how it works. It's very, very elegantly done, and it uses a new special version of Maya on the cloud that can do these microtransactions, and it actually lets you get the data up extremely efficiently. So the last thing that we want to do is just a quick recap. We saw the updated UI, the 3D type tool, motion graphics toolset, which we're super excited about. Cannot wait to see what designers do when they get their hands on these tools and the power of Maya 2016 Extension 2. And we're going to finish up with the fact that we have a bunch of motion graphics presets. If you go to the Creative Market today, it's their drop-down menu inside of Maya's user interface to get to the Creative Market. These presets are available today. They're free. We have categories for 3D type, futuristic UI, some infographics, as well as some broadcast design. And here's a couple examples of things that are actually done with them. If it'll play back. I don't know if it'll play back or not. Hopefully it will. There you go. And obviously this actually was done by our friends at Mainframe, which I think might be up next. Yes, so our good friends at Mainframe actually did that opening for us. These are done by our artists that we have. These are the free presets. So the Mainframe piece that just started isn't part of the presets, but all of these are motion design presets that you can get today with help files associated with them or video tutorials associated with them. So you can hop in there, start playing around with it, and see what these artists did to get to these effects using the Motion Design Toolkit. And I love this one. This one's kind of fun too. So thank you again, everyone, for taking the time to check out Maya 2016 Extension 2. Mainframe's up next, and they're going to be showing you guys more amazing things. Cheers.